Welcome back to Vivid Noise. Last time we took a look at a game called Charlie the Duck, which was an unapologetic Mario clone, so I thought, why not look at an actual Mario game this time, that being Super Mario World. My personal history with this game is a little bit of a complicated one, but I'll talk about that a little more later. So the thing about Super Mario World is that it really feels like a little bit of a reboot in a way. Not necessarily like a big redefinition of what Mario is, but just a full realization of everything that Mario, at least in my head, was always meant to be in this era. Don't get me wrong, the free games leading up to Mario World, or I guess 4 if you count Lost Levels, they're all legendary in their own way. The first one practically invented a genre. The second one introduced a bunch of characters which were initially not meant to belong to the Mario universe, but have since become staples. And the third one implemented a bunch of features which we now pretty much take for granted, like the overworlds, or being able to store items for later, mushroom houses, that sort of stuff. But in my opinion, Mario World really feels like the start of Mario, if that makes sense. It's what laid the groundwork for what I define as the 2D Mario identity. It's just something about the art direction, level design, overall game pacing, enemy design, those kind of things. It's funny that I mentioned that Mario World feels like it's supposed to be a realization of what the games were trying to be up until this point, because there's some concept art that genuinely proves that stuff like, for example, Yoshi was originally meant to appear much sooner, but due to the evident constraints of the NES, the team was never able to pull off something like Yoshi, despite the fact that I'm pretty sure that you can ride him and I think Mario is Missing, or Mario's Time Machine, one or the other. So obviously they eventually got that to work, but you know, not quite in 1985. I also can't deny that the jump in visual presentation definitely plays a part in why Mario World feels so definitive as a Mario experience on the Super Nintendo, and why it's almost hard for me to imagine Mario looking any different to how he looks now. This game really did lay down the fundamentals of Mario's visual language, because while the prior games were impressive in their own right considering what they were working with, it wasn't really until Mario Free that things started to look close to how they look now, and even then, Mario World solidified it. The richer color palette definitely helps. When I look at the first few Mario games, or really any game on the NES apart from maybe Kirby's Adventure, I see a quaint attempt at making something to look like anything, you know, because they're just so limited in how many colors they can use. I think maybe the Mega Man games are the only games that aren't too encumbered by this, and they were very clever with their color choices when making those. But when Nintendo made that jump to 16-bit, even compared to the Genesis, it was practically the jump to HD for pixel art. It made that much of a difference. Although I must reiterate, the visuals alone are not why I consider Mario World to be such a substantial game. Honestly, in terms of pure visual fidelity, I think these Super Mario All-Star remakes look a hell of a lot better than Mario World. And I'm aware that there's some pretty serious nostalgic bias when I say this, because despite my general unfamiliarity with emulation and complete lack of access to game consoles as a kid, I did eventually stumble upon this weird collection of Mario games with built-in emulators, and I got Mario All-Stars to work on it, so I played a hell of a lot of that. And also there's the case of a lot of Mario fan games like Mario Forever using those sprites, kind of like how almost every Sonic fan game uses the Sonic Advance sprites. But anyway, after playing this game recently, I really felt like an ignorant bastard, because for a really long time, I never understood why this was so many people's top pick for 2D Mario. Hell, even just Mario in general, or video games in general. This is a beloved game. Now that I've played it though, I totally get it. The thing about Mario World is that it doesn't really do anything too crazy. It's just a very well-rounded experience. The level design stays engaging without going overboard. The power-ups are, well, there's fewer of them compared to Mario Free, but I feel like they're well-balanced and overall just really fun to use without being overpowered or anything. Okay, except for maybe the Cape Feather in certain stages, but you really need some skill to be able to abuse it properly. As I mentioned already, the presentation received a massive step up, and as a musician myself, I can't help but be impressed by just how much Koji Kondo was able to squeeze out of just that single melody. I'm sure you already know, but there really is just one motif in this game that is used in all sorts of different musical contexts, and it works so well. And the few exceptions to that rule are exceptional compositions. Like, I love the castle theme so much. Also, the credits theme is absolutely god tier. Not quite up there with Mario 64's, but it's still really catchy. I think the only real issues with this game is that the bosses can be pretty underwhelming, but come on, you already know my stance on bosses, or at least I hope you do if you've watched my Shadow the Hedgehog video. And honestly, it's not the end of the world if a platformer has a couple mediocre combat encounters. It's a platformer. It's all about the platforming, obviously. Also, I'm personally not a huge fan of the ghost houses. I get why they included them, you know, just to sort of add like a little bit of a puzzle element to get you thinking a little more, but I feel like it kind of breaks the flow just a bit. Still, we have the luxury of the internet today, so they're not a big deal. I feel like it's now finally time for me to move on to my own personal first exposure, my first ever time seeing this game in action before I even got to play it, and why, despite my praise regarding this game, as with pretty much everyone, this game is great, I can't help but feel just a little bit weird when I play it. It's slowly fading over time, but when I first played this game a while ago, it really kicked in fast. So if any of you guys remember Proton John, he did a ton of playthroughs of these Mario ROM hacks, and I'm talking in the early days of YouTube, very early days, 2007. And go figure, that was my first time ever seeing Mario World in action, specifically Mario's Wacky Worlds. And no, I'm not talking about the canceled official Mario game. The ROM hack Wacky World is actually pretty impressive looking back in retrospect, because it featured a lot of mechanics that were not present in the original and incorporated them into some truly devious level design. Like there were these pipes that would change color and it would change whether or not you could walk through them, or these like yellow speed boosters, and Mario's color palette was all different. It was definitely a lot more than just a simple level hack like your typical Kaizo Mario. And if you're wondering why such additions have tainted the way I look at the game now, well, you gotta understand, that was my first time ever seeing Mario World. To me, that's just what the game was like. I obviously still knew what Mario was supposed to look like, for example, so I was a little curious as to why his color palette was different. But then you got stuff like the music. I don't actually have much nostalgia for Mario World's soundtrack, because as far as I'm concerned, the soundtrack to Mario World is just a bunch of Jet Set Radio tracks, because that's what Proton John used in the background of those videos. So when I look at Mario World, I've just got the concept of love playing in my head. Wacky World just painted such a different picture as to what Mario World was, in terms of its level design, the presentation in general, the energy that the game projected, its difficulty. So you can imagine that when I first played vanilla Super Mario World, it just felt kind of empty, dull, almost. For a long time, I just couldn't shake that feeling that there was just something missing. Like, where were all those strange new mechanics I saw? Why does Mario look normal? Where's Jet Set Radio? Yeah, it's pretty silly looking at it, but that is genuinely how I felt about this game years ago. Although I have since obviously developed a much greater appreciation for what it truly is on its own. Although this story is a pretty specific one to just me, I would not be surprised in the slightest if there's hundreds, thousands of other people who have had similar experiences with other such games. And it kind of makes sense that would happen, because when you're really young, you're not really sure how to get access to all those games that your parents won't buy you. So what do? You watch videos of those games, or really you just type in the name and you see whatever pops up, and if it happens to be a fan game or a ROM hack, well, so be it, you're gonna watch that. Or you'll play maybe flash games that are readily accessible in your browser. There's a reason why so many people's first exposure to, let's say, Sonic the Hedgehog, at least of my generation or slightly older maybe, was through Ultimate Sonic Flash, or maybe some other Sonic fan game. Like I think there was this one called Sonic Angel Island Zone. Because you don't have to download any emulators, you don't have to buy a game on Steam, or you don't have to do any of that more complicated stuff. That's really not very complicated at all, but when you're like, 12, it is pretty complicated. And speaking of Ultimate Sonic Flash, it is kind of unfortunate, but I will never be able to hear Angel Island Zone and not think of the first level of that fan game, because that's the music that it used. Or whenever I look at the sprites from the Mario and Luigi games for the Game Boy Advance, the first thing that comes to mind is Super Mario 63. Now that is a classic fan game. It's really good. But yeah, those are my overall thoughts on Mario World today, and in retrospect, considering my first exposure to the game. If you've got any similar experiences to mine, make sure to let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching another episode of Vivid Noise, and I'll see you guys next time.